Hey y'all, my name is Jenna Wadsworth. I am the Vice Chair of the Wake County Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Supervisors. So in this role, I represent the over 1.1 million people who call our capital county here, Wake County, home. And I have been lucky to serve in this role since the year 2010. I was actually a junior at NC State, go Wolfpack. So I'm an NC State grad. When I was first elected to the Soil and Water Board, it's a nonpartisan board. They are located throughout the country. They're called something a little bit different depending upon where you are. Anyways, when we ran the first time in 2010, we made history in North Carolina when I became the youngest woman ever elected to any political office in the history of the state. And I share that because I want y'all to know that age shouldn't be a determinant of your ability to make a real lasting impact on your community. You can start today. There's so much important, meaningful work that needs to be done. I can't wait to chat with our other panelists today and give you all some ideas about the ways that you can get involved in the fight for food justice in your own communities. I was also the 2020 Democratic nominee for North Carolina Commissioner of Agriculture, and we ran a really progressive, I would say probably the most progressive statewide campaign to date in North Carolina, talking about or finding bold solutions to some of the biggest issues that we're facing in society. And I truly believe that agriculture is the key to addressing so many of the issues that we're facing right now, from climate change to food insecurity to food justice to talking about criminal justice reform, equity, economic freedom, and more. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to chatting a little bit more about what we can do together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and thanks for being here. I'm going to give the floor to Mara now so she can introduce herself.
Hey y'all. I'm Mara Lowry, and I graduated just about a year ago, I think 11 months, from state with a degree in architecture and a minor in landscape architecture. And I'm now working as a food systems designer at Community Food Lab. So I kind of am relatively new to the food world and food justice. Community Food Lab, we're a small food systems design firm. So we kind of take a creative approach to a lot of different food system issues, combination of kind of planning and system analysis, some physical design. We've been working with Wake Parks on some like agriculture and parks designs, as well as some research. We did a study on farmers markets last summer, which I'm doing a presentation for the symposium. But I've definitely kind of over the past year been introduced to a lot of ways that food systems, mostly just how they work, coming from kind of a different background, but wanted to make sure to be here and kind of provide a perspective, somebody super new to all this, but reflecting on the fact it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of opportunity and exciting stuff happening that can be accessed from a lot of different fields and perspectives, from my experience in kind of architecture and design to a lot of other areas. They all connect to food because we all eat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Morgan, I'll give you the floor now.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, LP, for inviting me to come and speak on this panel. I'm really excited to be here with some incredible people today. And I graduated from Elon University, not too far from y'all in NC State, in 2016 with a degree in international relations and global studies. And I currently work as a grant writer for an organization out in the suburbs of Illinois, in the suburbs of Chicago, really, for People's Resource Center, which is a full-service human services agency that anchors everything through food. So we operate one of the largest food pantries in the Chicagoland area, and one of my dear friends, Rachel, who you'll hear from next, works with me through this whole network to not only improve equitable access to food through our community, but then also working to find the other entry points for individuals. They come to us and they're in times of need and distress. And so we kind of root our work through that, and then work with people through job assistance, through educational programs, to just build a stronger community out here in the Chicagoland area.
Awesome. And finally, I'll hand it over to Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Morgan. As Morgan mentioned, I am also working out in the suburbs of Chicago. So my name is Rachel Lechuga. If you didn't get it right off the bat, my last name means lettuce. So if you have any questions about why I'm in food, there's no questions, that answers it. I, for the last 5 or so years, have been farming up until this current year. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I started my job at Northern Illinois Food Bank. But prior to that, I was farming around rural Illinois and South Chicago on an urban farm, which was a lot of fun, and growing is definitely my passion. But as Jenna mentioned, I truly believe that food is just this access point for addressing so many different types of structural issues that we see. My role at Northern Illinois Food Bank is I am the coordinator for our online pantry service, which is called My Pantry Express. So our service operates in different counties across Illinois, and we have definitely seen an increase in need and volume of people using our service as the pandemic hit. So it's just been very interesting and challenging to try to address everyone's needs in an equitable way when people are accessing the charitable food network that have never had to access it before. So like Morgan mentioned, just trying to find those ways of seeing that common ground and seeing how we can build, a supportive community coming out of this.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Allison, who currently works at the agroecology farm on campus, might be calling in later into this call as well. But we're going to go ahead and move into the question part of the session. So I will hand it off to Gracie.
Yeah, we're going to get it started. I think LP is going to spotlight our panelists if you want to make them show up. But we're going to get started with the first question, just explaining why you decided to pursue a career in this field. Already gave us a sneak peek into her last name, but
Gracie, could you repeat the question? I think you were breaking up there a little bit.
so sorry. If you guys could all explain why you chose to go into this career field.
I'll start here. I actually entered my field kind of by accident. I started off as an AmeriCorps Vista with Northern Illinois Food Bank 5 years ago after discovering that working in a corporate environment was not going to work for me, and decided that I could better use my skills and interests toward resource development for organizations. So from there, I've just kind of been doing more of that and gaining more experience, particularly on the grant writing side, to find funding for programs and organizations. So I kind of fell into it and fell in love with it at the same time. And so my path from here on has really been shaped by food access, and every point along the way, whether that's access to it, to culturally relevant and appropriate foods as well. I spent a lot of my time advocating for that approach as well out in the Chicagoland area. And yeah, so just kind of fell into it as an AmeriCorps Vista and now as a grant writer, but always in resource development.
So I actually grew up on a hog cow, chicken, corn, cotton, tobacco, and soybean farm on a dirt road in the neighboring Johnston County. It was my grandparents' farm, and my earliest memories are all there. It was probably like some point in elementary school before I realized when people said they had canned vegetables that they meant like out of like like an aluminum or steel can, not from a mason jar, which is what my granny, when we were talking about canning vegetables, looked like. That is something that my upbringing, my childhood was something that used to be shared amongst everybody. There's no secret that tobacco, cotton built the roads in this state. But that's less so the case now, as we're seeing, especially unchecked development, unsustainable development. We're seeing an increase in population, and all of that's fine. But I think now it's more important than ever to preserve our family farms, preserve an opportunity for people to be able to grow their food and connect with nature and the land in that way. I still do 6 to 10 acres of garden every season. Last season I grew something like 44 different crops. Just really had fun with it. And then we rent the bulk of our land, so I help my father manage the operation. So this is really still a part of who I am, and something that I love doing every single day. Like Rachel was talking about, this is a part of who you are. And so, when I was thinking about agriculture, I ran for soil and water when I was at NC State. I had an amazing mentor. I'm the first to tell you that Black women are the reason why I am where I am. A woman named Danielle Adams, who's a former Durham County Soil and Water Supervisor, and her mother, Stella Adams, who was the first Black woman ever elected to Soil and Water in the state, mentored and encouraged me. And when they saw that there was a role coming open on the Wake board, they encouraged me to run. They were also the first people to reach out to me and encourage me to run for Commissioner of Agriculture last cycle. And they helped to inform my platform and policy issues. Anyone familiar with the campaign knows that in addition to climate change and food insecurity, one of the other big things we talked about was cannabis legalization and reforming the hemp equity in the hemp industry. And so, I looked at what was happening in the world. I look at what was happening in North Carolina agriculture, especially with the issues of consolidation. I knew that there won't be a next generation to be able to be engaged and involved in the family farm with the way that consolidation is going, with the way that climate change is going. I looked at what our world looks like, and frankly, I thought that my opponent wasn't doing enough. It wasn't enough for our small Black farmers, our veteran farmers. It wasn't enough to tackle the climate crisis that was threatening the long-term economic viability of our agricultural sector. It wasn't enough for our hungry children, the 1 in 5 children in this state of North Carolina that are going to bed hungry every single night. And they have growling bellies and can't pay attention to what they're supposed to be learning in school. It wasn't enough for our Latinx farm workers who make up the backbone of our industry, but whose dignity and well-being was not being prioritized over corporate profit margins. And I just said, hey, this is work that I have to do. This is work that I'm passionate about.
I'm going to give snaps to Jenna. So like I mentioned, my last name is kind of no surprise that I'm here. I have this funny story that my mom in high school told me, like one day, Rachel, you're going to do something in food, and I don't know what it is. But I come from a long legacy of farmers, not in this country, but in South America and Central America. So I, at some point kind of realized I was studying my degree at Northern Illinois in conservation and wildlife restoration, which really kind of always came back to this topic of agriculture. It was like, it didn't matter what class I took. It didn't matter if it was soil quality or water quality or environmental ethics or whatever it was. But it would always come back to this kind of question and issue of agriculture. So I want to say that that's where it really started for me, to kind of draw those pieces together to see that I think food, as someone mentioned earlier, is we all eat. So it's such an integral piece to what we do. And not only that, but just food and how it's integrated into culture. So I did notice that one of the things that was missing out of my school was not only a physical degree in something like this. So I did have to kind of tailor my degree to focus on sustainable food systems and then local food, which was very difficult at the time because we didn't have a lot of classes that kind of did that. So there was a lot of outside learning. And as I was doing some learning outside, kind of like with what Jenna mentioned, there was a lot of Black and Latinx individuals that started to pull a certain intersectionality into the topic. And so from there, I think I kind of started to see just a different point of view that I wasn't getting really in my degree that I was studying and within conservation as well. So I was kind of studying conservation over here, but mostly studying food over here. And so a lot of that, like I mentioned, was kind of offline, kind of whenever I had time for it. And then just continuing to advocate for farm workers, for food justice, whatever that looked like. So organizing a lot on campus. And then once I decided to farm in South Chicago, that was just an opportunity for me that was great. I was able to work with teenagers on the south side of Chicago, which was awesome. They were all wonderful and wanted to know more about food and where their food comes from and how they can possibly grow food in the area that they were in. And it was amazing the types of projects that we did and just their dedication to learning. So that also really connected that intersectionality then for me too of what voices are historically missing from the conversation when it comes to agriculture and food justice. I think a lot of what I was also taught in my academic career was kind of the food revolution. And there was only a certain type of people that participated in the food revolution. And it was only a certain type of person that could access the food revolution. And so that to me did not sit well, again, talking about this intersectionality. So a lot of it has been me kind of creating my own path and paving my way and seeing what works next. And kind of not being afraid to just fall into whatever opportunity comes next.
Probably similar to Morgan, she mentioned I pretty much stumbled into kind of the food world. My degree and kind of focus in school was in architecture. So kind of the built environment and the decisions and thinking that goes into these design decisions. But like that original interest for me had often kind of the foundation of it was how do these things interact with the communities and kind of power and decision making in all these parts of how we interact with each other and the environment. And after kind of working a bit with Erin at Community Food Lab, realized that food is this really natural intersection between the environment, like obviously agriculture, it involves land and decisions about how we use land. But then so much of our communities are built around eating and sharing that space together. So when we start to think about kind of that, like building decisions and design and larger systemic kind of exploration, food's this really interesting place for all that to happen. So I kind of stumbled into food, realized it's fascinating. There's a lot of stuff here and a lot of stuff that I'm learning that I really care about as we get into it. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. My next question for you all is, what are some of the greater joys and challenges you face doing this work on a daily basis?
I will go. I have to say it's kind of like in both, the ability to fail is very important. I notice in my position, for example, in my position as a coordinator at My Pantry Express, this is a completely new platform that is coming on to most of the country right now. So during the pandemic, individual organizations are trying to also have their own type of online system. But when we're in conversations with some of these places, they're just not scaling at the volume that we are. Seeing because we are part of the Northern Illinois Food Bank, we can have just more resources, and which is really great. But also because this has not been done before, very difficult to figure out what's the next move, what do we do next, who's missing from the conversation. And so we are constantly failing in an effort to, create something new and make something better. So definitely that. And I know Jenna can attest to this, but as a farmer, you have to be okay with failing and knowing that weather will come, that the next day it might not be as warm as it said it was going to be, and just really kind of flowing and learning to go with the motions of it, and being okay with that is also a big challenge. Sometimes it can feel really good when you're riding the wave, and you know that you're just in a good groove of that. Other times when you have a specific goal in mind and that doesn't get reached, it can be a little difficult to, take a step back and be like, that's okay that we didn't get there, and then try to regroup from there too. So I'll have to say failure.
So Rachel's absolutely right. Ask my eggplant my eggplant crop for the last several years, between Japanese beetles and then drought and loamy soil, everything in between. But something else that Rachel said a little bit earlier was, what is, going into spaces where you're traditionally not welcomed. My personal mantra in life is to be a woman who lifts as she rises. So if I can use my privilege to create space at the table to bring new and diverse voices that often don't get the recognition or the attention that they deserve, I'm absolutely going to do it. And I see it as a personal mission of mine. But what's really interesting is I myself sometimes, despite the fact that I've been elected for now 11 years and been occupying this space, it is still a very white, male, cisgender dominated, heteronormative dominant space. And, that's true in soil and water, where something like generally out of, hundreds and hundreds of soil and water supervisors across the state, less than 40 are women. And there's 5 in almost every county. When you talk about the Commissioner of Agriculture role, only 1 woman has ever been elected, and she didn't even complete a term, right? And so a lot of times on the campaign trail, regularly people said I didn't look enough like a farmer, or they would question my identity or ascribe certain roles to me, or assume that I was not capable of doing certain things. I love that there was all this misconception, like, oh, look, she has like half an acre. I'm like, we have over 100 acres of farmland that I'm capable of running. Thank you. Or they would look at me, and because they would find out that I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and yes, I'm cisgender, but as a member of the LGBTQ community, I in particular really care about hunger, because a lot of queer folks have an issue when it comes to access to food. A lot of times because, say, you're a queer teen, you got kicked out of your home, or you left home early, you already have a problem with housing insecurity, you've got a problem with job security. A lot of times the idea of being able to afford food, let alone healthy produce, is something that's, unattainable to you. But I love that all of a sudden, because I was a member of the queer community and I was out and proud about it, I literally had people say, how is she going to understand how farming works, because she doesn't understand the birds and the bees. She doesn't understand how mating works between animals. It was mind-blowing to me that is what people would get hung up on. And so, yeah, I absolutely understand what it's like to walk into a room and not be welcomed. The other thing that I fought for in particular were small farms. I never said, oh, big farms are bad. I probably came close in a number of different ways for all the bad actions that maybe they were participating in, or the way that they were treating workers, or the way that they were degrading our environment and natural resources, or not paying their fair share of taxes, and how they would absolutely upend a community as soon as it was cheaper to go grow or raise food somewhere else, right? Which was my problem with companies and corporations like Smithfield. And, as a result of that, because I was seen as a threat to their bottom line and wanted to fight back against consolidation, wanted to build a more sustainable, local, resilient food system, wanted to support our small farmers and finally give them the chance to be successful, to be able to apply for aid programs like the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, which disproportionately went to larger farmers when it was supposed to go to our small farmers who were really struggling during this pandemic. Because I had the audacity to speak out and be a truth teller about what was happening, these corporations spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars spreading lies and misinformation about me. So, they don't want to have to pay their fair share. They don't want to have to be a good actor. And I think it's really important for those of us in the food justice realm to continue to hold people accountable and to shine light into the dark spaces and to be a truth teller.
So for me, some of the biggest challenges that I've encountered, I'm going to start with that and then move into what keeps me going, because there is joy in that, right? There are, I think across the country, demographics are shifting and changing, and the same is true in the suburbs of Chicago where I am working. And it used to be a predominantly white Christian town, or region rather, and that's changing, that's shifting. And unfortunately, we're still using the same solutions. We're still using the same playbook rather to solve those issues, as opposed to adapting to what the community needs. We have a larger refugee and immigrant population. We have more needs for halal foods. How are we addressing that? And we're not. So for me, it's very frustrating, especially as someone who's on a resource development side, trying to inform people about, this is what funders are looking for, and trying to use that as kind of my carrot, which is where my joy comes from. Because I know things that some people don't on a program side. They're creating things, they're developing things. They work great. At the same time, if I'm able to come to people and say, well, it's great that you're doing it this way. All these other funders, if you want more to do more, you're going to have to adjust it in this way. And until that perspective is given, that's when people start to shift and say, okay, well, who do we talk to? How do we tap into this? And that has been the most challenging, is getting people to understand that their view is not their view, they're what they were trained on, especially those who are older, don't value, kind of like Jenna was talking about earlier, they aren't valuing the perspectives, the experiences, and even the knowledge that people who are younger have. And there is so much there. And I see it every day with people that I interact with volunteers who are younger and are in high school and who are saying something's not right here, things aren't connecting. And to be able to have those conversations with people gives me a lot of hope that, 10 years from now, even though that might be too late, you have to start somewhere, and by bringing those young people into these circles, we can start to shift those mindsets more.
Yeah, it's been interesting hearing everybody, because I think just this theme of like rolling with failure that Rachel brought up has gone through everybody's answers, and I'm about to say the same thing again. But especially I think in the work we've done with some kind of design and planning processes. We're currently working with Wake County to try and get more agriculture in parks. So integrating agriculture at small and larger scales into parks programming. And we're lucky because Wake County has been super supportive of this, but it's a conversation that just doesn't exist a lot of the time. And bringing it into a lot of these development decisions, just there isn't necessarily the language for it. And it's sometimes frustrating just because kind of having to explain these ideas to people who just don't think about it ever. It's constantly kind of over and over, and also you get resistance because people aren't wanting to change ways of doing things. But at the same time, when you get somebody supportive and excited about, I know at Beach Bluff County Park, in Wake County, we're working on getting kind of a permaculture orchard, and I think about 5 acres of like cover crops specifically targeted towards increasing soil sustainability and kind of showing off a lot of these new practices that hopefully can kind of expand in different areas. But getting people excited about that and having all these conversations where people do really get excited about things just makes all of it super worth it. And kind of that flip side, there's less failure, but then when you get one of those kind of little wins, it's really exciting and a fun place to be.
Thank you. I just saw Cole's question in the chat. So all of you were kind of addressing this or like touching on it, and so now I'd like to ask you to go a little bit more in depth with some misconceptions that you're currently dealing with and having to fight in your fields, and how you specifically think like the best like current ways to fight those misconceptions and prove them wrong are.
I think about this a lot. And so I'm going to jump in here and say that my role as a grant writer and my background, while it's international relations and studies, is really actually rooted in journalism. And I spent quite a bit of time in in the Triad area, reporting on a lot of immigrant and refugee issues that transformed how I looked at problems and how I communicated those struggles and the community resilience within it. And so as someone who works in food justice from a food access perspective, there's so many misconceptions around who needs access, when they need it, why they need it. There's still this we versus the other mentality that I personally have tried to work through and push through, using not just affirmative communications, but really strengths-based communications, and talking about communities and talking about the full person, right? People are so much more than just the challenge that they are going through. They have lives, they have other feelings that should be validated. And when we can share those stories and when we can humanize the issue more, especially around food access, then we can start to really break away at the stereotypes and the misconceptions that people have about who needs it, when, why, and really bring people together so that we can lift everyone up at the same time, rather than saying, you're here, you need to stay here, you've made poor decisions, and that this is how you should suffer because of that, you know. So that's what I've been working on out here from a communication standpoint, really, because words matter.
Ooh, that is a, yeah, loaded question, I think. Piggybacking off of what Morgan said, you know, within the different spaces that I've taken up, Jenna touched on this, but as a farmer, as an organic vegetable farmer, people don't see that as like farming for whatever reason. Like, it's not hard work, like, I don't know. But that is a huge misconception of, oh, like, she's just this young girl. What could she possibly do? She can't possibly be doing all of this, like, you know, brute strength required work. Was a really huge thing that I saw. And also this kind of narrative of like, she's just a farm hand. So never that like she could be the farm owner, which I'm more than capable of. That is just not the space that I decided to take up. Also, it was very hard to find that space if you do want to be a brown woman farm owner. So those two misconceptions were definitely very, very deeply integrated when I was working at the farms. Ultimately, the reasons why I'm not doing it anymore, and going with what Morgan said in terms of food access through the type of work that I'm doing right now, is these misconceptions about what type of people need assistance, and just a lot of internalized bias of, you know, I'm here to do the good work and you are the one that needs the help. And so it's kind of always this like, I'm helping you, as opposed to we are supporting each other. So with the program that I work with, it is very difficult to try to continue to have these conversations about why we want a human-centered design, about why it's very important that we put these people at the forefront of our decision-making, as opposed to efficiency, as opposed to, you know, whatever else that might come in the way, is really thinking about what the needs are. So in that space as well, I have to say that as a brown woman, a lot of times I am looked at as kind of the spokesperson for my community, which I am just one person in a large community with a variety of different needs and ways of being, that I simply cannot talk or speak to what everyone needs. So when those decisions are being made, it does take a lot of time, surveying, trust building, and speaking to the people about what they actually need, because how will we know unless we ask, right? So it is very much like swimming upstream, but I think of like the example of the salmon who swims upstream and transforms itself back into a freshwater fish. So that is me. That is what I try to go for, is that transformation. And although it is difficult to swim upstream, it's not impossible.
Something that kind of comes to mind, a specific misconception that I've run into a bit and starting to recognize more, is sort of a lot of the time when we talk about building and design come development, there's this idea, especially around food justice, that you kind of build it and people will come. And you know, things like a community garden or a food pantry, you create it, it'll do its job, without recognizing a lot of the just community support and infrastructure that needs to be built beyond just like a physical thing. Like that's sort of the easy part. So a lot of what, because I came in with a lot of experience in that building stuff, and a lot of what I've been learning over the past year is how to facilitate kind of that like relationship building, and the community that goes into all this. Right now we're working on a food pantry design for Nash, UNC Nash Hospital. And they've been super great because at the very beginning it was like, hey, can you help us design this space, but also how this will all work and the partnerships that need to happen. I think a lot of the time with people from, especially the design side of things, there's this misconception that it's just about putting something into the world and not about kind of facilitating a lot of the community around it. And it's just, I think it happens, but sometimes people miss it.
So something that Morgan and Rachel both alluded to was just what does hunger even look like? So in North Carolina, people may not realize that while the agricultural industry as a whole here is our biggest economic industry. It brings in something like $92.7 billion annually and employs over 770,000 people from Murphy to Manteo. This is a huge industry. And I mean, you're just talking about massive amounts of money. I think it's important to realize the power of the purse, the power of your purchasing power too, when you as a consumer are deciding who you're going to support in this industry. But as far as hunger, 1 in 7 North Carolinians are struggling with hunger. And 1 in 5 children, as I mentioned earlier, are going to sleep hungry at night. That's roughly 1.5 million people in this state who are food insecure. That's 1.5 million people who either don't know where their next meal is coming from, or they're going to consume food that isn't as nutrient rich because maybe they live in a food desert where the only access to food that you have is at like a Dollar General or a Dollar Tree, where you're going to see stuff that isn't whole foods. You're thinking about how if we wanted to fix and throw money at this problem, it would cost over $719 million to address food insecurity just in this state. Although arguably, I would say that would be money that would be well spent, because I believe that when you talk about the dignity and well-being of a population, if you're hungry, you can't focus on anything else. If you're hungry or you're unhealthy, because all of that's connected to health and wellness, you can't be an economically productive citizen, right? And, in particular, since this pandemic started, we've only seen rates of food insecurity be further exacerbated, in particular in the Black and Brown community. Some estimates that I saw said that something like 4 out of 10 Black and Hispanic families have been struggling with getting food on the table since this pandemic started. Something else that we've talked about over and over again here, we've mentioned is how COVID has drastically changed the food supply, how there are more people now than ever, especially early on in the pandemic, where we essentially had bread lines in this country, right? There were people who lost their job, who lost unemployment benefits, who lost health care, children who were no longer getting their free or reduced cost lunch or breakfast at their schools. People needed access to food banks, to churches, to schools, to nonprofits that were distributing food more so than ever before. For me, I looked at it as not a handout, but a hand up, right? As a responsibility incumbent upon us as a community to take care of our neighbors, to be a good neighbor. And, when I was just thinking about things that needed to change and reform in our food system, obviously consolidation is part of the the biggest problem, because it's drastically changed how supply chains work. You noticed probably when you went to the grocery store those first couple weeks, and a picture popped up in my phone the other day as like a memory on my iPhone, and I wish I had not seen it because it was just so horrific to remember what it was like going to a grocery store that first time and there was nothing on the shelves. And that's when you knew that something was really, really bad with this pandemic, that sinking pit that you had in your stomach. And you know, it's because we didn't know how to reroute the supply chain to get food from farmers to grocery stores instead of to restaurants and schools and everywhere else it was going. You know, I kept encouraging folks, grow your own victory garden, or go support your local farmers, go to your farmers markets, go actually, you know, purchase and keep money in and jobs in your community. But out of that came a bill that I thought everyone would be able to get behind. I helped create something called Senate Bill 776 from the 2019 session. It was called the COVID-19 Small Farmers Relief Act. And what it would have done was radically shift the food supply distribution chain and make sure that, first of all, because we saw issues with labor, we saw issues with farmers getting their produce to market. We saw produce, like hundreds of thousands of dollars of produce just going to waste and rotting in fields because they could not get it to the stores or to the food banks where it was needed. And so what this bill would have done, I had this idea where farmers could get up to $100,000 tax relief, tax credit for any of the food that they donated. Money, a couple million would go to A&T, because I love NC State, but money never goes to A&T, and they're doing groundbreaking work when it comes to food justice and urban food systems. Money would have gone to A&T and cooperative extension, which is trusted by farmers throughout communities, in order to change the supply chain. And then that food would have been routed to nonprofits, churches, and schools that were doing the important work of taking care of our community when our community needed the help the most. And I thought this was a bill that everyone could get behind because you supported farmers, you supported, you know, taking care of our children, you talked about education. Of course, it got stalled in committee. And so, you know, a political fissure came in, something that shouldn't have been partisan, something that we all should have agreed about as being good public policy that was actually going to help the people who needed the help the most, was something that became partisan. So I think that's something that's really upsetting to me, and that I wish that we could continue to work to address, is that, you know, hunger could look like anything. Anyone on this call right now could be struggling to put food on their table. And so it's so important for us to use government and policy to make systemic changes that can address these very big issues.
Thank you so much. It is so inspiring to hear about the work you guys have all been doing and the battles you face. We were just so excited to hear from you, and I'm going to hand it over to Haley, who's going to ask some of the questions that have been dropped into the chat.
Hi, everyone. I think one of the only questions that didn't get answered mid-chat was from Cole, and he asked for the panelists to talk about their experiences with language barriers and how language justice interacts with their work in food justice.
So for the first, I don't know, 3-4 months of the pandemic, I was on site for our food distributions. Everything had been transformed outside. We had only a certain number of distributions a day. I was there every other week for 3 days a week. And unfortunately, kind of like what I was talking about earlier, there is no conscious effort to include people of different language and cultural backgrounds into our work. I am not even on a program staff and am one of maybe 2 people at my organization of 45 that speaks Spanish. And the vast majority, probably about 30% of those who are visiting us for services, especially food access programs, identify as Spanish speaking, and that they prefer that language. And so for me, it's been very frustrating over the last year to have to convince and explain why information should be available in at least Spanish, and having leadership that doesn't speak another language and hasn't been as culturally, hasn't done cultural awareness trainings or been really rooted in any other culture at all, and same with volunteers, makes it extremely difficult. So finally, when the pandemic did hit, there was more of a recognition that we need to do this. And so I was very proud when they decided that they were going to translate these postcards with immediate information on them about our services into the top 5 reported first languages. It included English, Spanish, Burmese, Russian, and Urdu, I believe, those 5. And so finally, we've started to make these steps a reality. The biggest challenge for us is then that we don't know how to recruit then on the other side, the volunteers or the base that would be able to help us with that translation, because there's still this unfortunate divide of, well, these individuals are receiving our services. We cannot allow them to also volunteer because if they did, they would expect special privileges. And that type of mindset is very much rooted in this not only internalized bias, but also in that white savior mentality of like, we're here to help you, not the other way around. So it's been challenging, but I'm proud that we're finally kind of waking up to the reality that that needs to change. And so we're utilizing more of the Language Access Resource Center that we have out here in the suburbs and starting to recognize that we need to translate information and offer the services in other languages that aren't food-based and are more personal. So yes, that is hugely, hugely important in the work that I've been doing.
Yeah, I have to say something similar, especially when it comes to translating our materials, making them even just more accessible. So I speak Spanish, so in my position, I'm able to do the translating for my team, and I'm able to field questions from our Spanish-speaking shoppers. But to Morgan's point, we don't have a large volunteer force that then speaks Spanish. So although I can refer them to the service, or I can, refer them to the distribution, it's like from there, how do we set the expectations? Because right now we don't have the team that can like walk them through any questions that they might have. So a lot of what my team does is just thinking about how we can alleviate anxieties and how we can make information just more accessible. And in that way too, I think in terms of language justice, being very intentional about how we are marketing things, how we are saying things to our neighbors and to our community. Because again, kind of with what Morgan was saying, that white savior attitude is very much like, we're here to help you. Here is the charity service. Come as you will. And that is not the attitude that we're trying to portray, because we want to, demolish these stigmas. We want people to be able to access the charitable food network when they need it. And have this mentality of like, we're all a paycheck away from possibly needing to use this service. So how can we make it more accessible and just more normalized that this service exists? And so kind of using that language of intentionality of not like, get help here, but knowing that we're just here to support you if and when you need it. And if you don't decide that you don't want to use our service, that is also okay. And we're not going to continue to try to reach out to you or bother you or pester you to get you to force you to use our service. Everyone has their own way of being and living. And so trying to honor that through the language we use is very important.
So after college, I had the opportunity to participate in a campaign fellowship with a man named Jose Hernandez, who was a farm worker turned NASA astronaut. Just a really incredible guy and a good friend. And through that experience, I got to meet farm workers in the Central Valley in California. And shadow them and talk with them about their experiences every day. I registered farm workers in California to vote. And we talked about building power and union organizing. It's also how I get to meet Dolores Huerta, who's one of my personal heroes, and talked about farm worker justice. And so this is something that's been an issue I've been passionate about for a very long time. So when I went to run statewide, part of my platform too, I would talk about how I believe the people who picked our food, the people who are the backbone of the agricultural industry, deserve a moral pathway to citizenship. And how a truly great America would have already addressed the immigration crisis instead of treating it like a pest problem. When Morgan too was talking about that white savior complex attitude, so often I hear from farmers and producers, they're like, oh, we treat our workers well. They're like family, we give them somewhere to sleep. I'm like, you realize what the wages are, right? I mean, like $11 an hour to do backbreaking work where they're likely to get green tobacco sickness, or you're not providing adequate access to PPE, you're busing them 45 minutes to an hour each direction, so they're in close contact. They don't have heat or air. Then we had the issue where a lot of these plants or corporate stores this year closed off access to kitchens, so then farm workers couldn't actually bring food with them, and they were essentially, these employers were engaging in a company store where they were making the employees that were here on H-1B visas pay like $45 a week for food that was crap, honestly, and not really a high nutritional content. And they were required to pay for that food, and that amount of money for some of these workers would have paid for a family of 4 to eat for several weeks back home. That wasn't the only thing we saw. And so when COVID started, and I saw what was happening, especially to our farm worker community, I went and visited meatpacking plants. I saw what was happening to Latinx farm workers in meatpacking plants. I literally heard a floor supervisor tell workers that if they did not show up to work, even though he wasn't providing adequate access to PPE or putting up glass shields or doing anything else that would have helped to reduce the likelihood of contraction of COVID-19 in these plants, he's like, I'll find other workers. You don't come back. And so lack of access to legal resources, lack of access to, worker comp resources. OSHA did very little to step in and actually help farm workers, let alone not providing adequate access to information about COVID-19 contraction in Spanish in a lot of these places where the majority of workers were Latino or Hispanic. And then, that just got worse when I saw that, part of the way through the second fundraising quarter, my opponent's biggest donation came from a man named Ronald Cameron. And Ronald Cameron is the CEO and chairman of the 6th largest poultry processing facility in the country, and Mount Air Farms. And Mount Air Farms had a plant in Siler City. And early on in April, pretty early on, we saw that there was news that broke that there was a massive outbreak of COVID-19 at that plant in Siler City, 74 cases. Guess who the majority of those folks who had the cases looked like? Guess what they look like? And then, what was really crazy to me is that donation was made one day later after the news of the outbreak, and another 1,800 workers basically weren't tested. Up to 1,800 additional workers. And so there was really no recourse for action. I was like, how do we get information out to farm workers? And anyways, I kept talking about these issues. And so I spoke with Latino journalists, and we did this whole forum that my opponent was invited to too, to talk about issues in the Latinx farm working community and providing resources and access to materials and PPE. My opponent refused to show up. And so Inland's Latino then wrote this great piece afterwards. It was all in Spanish. We also had Spanish translation throughout the event, the video event. And a number of my opponent's supporters got very upset about this piece. And they said that I was purposely trying to keep information away from them because I posted news articles that were in Spanish. So first of all, let's just talk about how ridiculous it is that, the fact that they don't speak another language is somehow my problem. And so they used Google Translate. They thought they found something. And then 11 commodity groups tried to publish an article saying that I was saying that farmers were treating their farm workers badly, letting them die and burying them in their backyards. So this is the importance of talking about access to language opportunities, talking about barriers to access, talking about this white savior complex, talking about institutional racism, systemic racism in the agricultural system. I mean, all of these things are interconnected. And so we don't have a very inclusive and diverse community. A lot of people don't feel welcomed in agriculture, and we have to work every single day to change that.
Okay, so we want to respect the panelists' time today, but I want to give the most sincere thank you. I have learned so much in the past hour, and I'm sure all of our attendees feel the same. I would encourage everyone on the call to check out our website because we have some really exciting events later on in the week. If you would like to hear more about Mara's work, there's a video posted on the website of her talking about her farmers market research, as well as Jenna is having a session tomorrow. And all that information is on the website. Gracie just put that in the chat for you all. Thank you guys so much for attending. We're so excited about the symposium.
Just big thank you to all y'all. I know I've learned a ton too. It's been great to hear from other folks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank
Great
you.
job.
And,
Thanks, y'all.
and for anyone who wants to connect, I only speak for myself, but if anyone does want to connect with me on LinkedIn or any other channels with other questions, please feel free to.
Yeah, same. I dropped my email there and LinkedIn as well if you want to connect.
I just want to say kudos to my fellow panelists. You all are awesome, incredible women doing phenomenal work. So thank you so much for all everything that you're bringing to this space, and thank you to the organizers for organizing this.